Picture this: the heavy wooden doors of a Viking longhouse groan shut against the howling northern wind, and suddenly the world outside disappears. Inside, the air is suffocating, thick with the mingled odors of wood smoke, spilt ale, roasted meat, and the raw, unwashed bodies of dozens of warriors pressed shoulder to shoulder. The hall is alive, roaring with the laughter and boasts of men who have stared death in the eye and lived to drink about it. The central hearth burns like the beating heart of the clan, flames leaping high enough to lick the soot-blackened beams above. Horns of mead clink, fists slam the tables, and sagas of gods and heroes rise in song, filling every corner of the smoky air. And there sits Bjorn. Barely 18 summers old, his face still caught between the boy he once was and the hardened warrior he is expected to become. His hands rest on the rough-hewn bench, calloused from training, stained with the blood of battles won at sea and shore. Around him, men measure their worth in scars, in the glitter of arm rings, in the promise of sons yet to be born. Here masculinity is not a choice, it is a cage. Here man is a rock, unyielding, defined by conquest, of enemies, of land, of women. To falter, to show softness, is to risk being shattered. The skald's voice rises above the din, chanting of Odin's cunning, of Thor's hammer striking down giants, of gods who seize what they desire without hesitation. But Bjorn's mind drifts. He does not hear the stories of power and destiny. His gaze has fixed across the fire. There, half shrouded in the shifting glow of the flames, sits Leif. Older by a handful of years, weathered by raids across the seas, his jaw shadowed with a beard glistening in grease, his eyes grey as the stormy North Sea. And then, it happens. A moment so fleeting it could vanish like smoke. Their eyes lock. Not in the blunt camaraderie of warriors, not in the easy brotherhood of men who have bled together, but in something far sharper, more dangerous. In that silence, amidst the thunder of laughter and the roar of fire, a secret understanding passes between them. A recognition, a temptation, a wound waiting to open. For in this hall, love between men is not sung of in sagas. It is whispered about like a curse. The worth of a Viking is measured by dominance, by how many lives he takes, how many sons he sires. To be seen otherwise is to risk dishonor, exile, even death at the hands of one's own kin. Bjorn knows this. He has grown up hearing the warnings, the cruel laughter when a man is accused of being less than the pillar of unyielding masculinity. And yet, in this moment, he cannot look away. The firelight flickers, dancing over Leif's face, and Bjorn feels a dangerous warmth rise in his chest. It is not the heat of the hearth, but something far more perilous. For one glance, one slip could ignite a secret that burns hotter than any Saxon blade. In the Viking world, masculinity was not just a trait. It was a weapon, a shield, and the very foundation upon which society rested. To be a man in the North was to dominate. Action, aggression, penetration. These were the verbs that defined male worth. A warrior was judged not only by how many enemies he felled in battle, but by how forcefully he could plow the earth for crops, by how many sons he could sire, and by how unflinchingly he could impose his will upon the world. In this brutal calculus, there was no room for softness, no allowance for hesitation, and certainly no forgiveness for weakness. And yet, woven into the very fabric of this iron masculinity was a shadow, a word so venomous that to speak it aloud was to stain a man's soul forever, ergi. It was more than an insult. It was a mark of contamination, a spiritual and social curse. Ergi was not simply a condemnation of same-sex intimacy. The Viking mind did not operate on the modern binaries of gay or straight. Instead, ergi targeted something far more specific, and in their eyes, far more dangerous: passivity. To be the one who received, to take the submissive role in sex with another man, was to become unmanly. Such a man ceased to be a warrior, ceased to be trustworthy, ceased to be human. This is why the accusation of being an erg man was devastating. It stripped away everything a Viking valued: his honor, his legal rights, his ability to inherit property, even his standing in the eyes of the gods. An erg man was a social ghost, despised, rejected, and cast out of the circle of men. His testimony in a legal dispute was worthless. His presence in the longhouse an insult. His very breath an act of shame. The Norse sagas, with all their thunderous battles and blood feuds, return again and again to this theme. They reveal a culture obsessed not only with strength, but with the policing of weakness. In these stories, the greatest terror is not to die with a sword in your hand, but to live branded with ergi. And so came the most feared weapon in a man's arsenal, the nid. Unlike an axe or a spear, the enid was forged not from iron but from words. It was the insult of insults, the ultimate act of verbal violence. To call another man arg, to accuse him of being ergi, was to set fire to his entire existence. And the law, astonishingly, permitted the accused to answer not with words but with steel. That was the power of the nid. It blurred the boundary between language and bloodshed. If someone spat the word at you across the smoky air of a longhouse, the law itself gave you the right to draw your sword and cut him down where he stood, without punishment. Imagine a society where one whispered insult could ignite a duel to the death. That was Viking honor. But why was ergi so catastrophic? Because it inverted the very architecture of Norse masculinity. In their world, men were defined by their ability to penetrate, to strike through a shield wall, to pierce the soil with a plow, to thrust their lineage forward through sons. These were acts of dominance. To be on the receiving end was to relinquish that dominance, to embody femininity. And femininity, in the harsh logic of the Viking Age, was not merely different. It was despised when embodied by a man. Consider the paradox this created. Viking society tolerated acts of male-on-male dominance when used as a weapon. Forcing a rival into submission, even sexually, could perversely be framed as a triumph of masculinity. It was not the act itself that was forbidden, it was the role. The stigma lay in being the one overpowered, not in doing the overpowering. This twisted logic reveals a culture where sex could be weaponized, transformed into an assertion of social superiority. The sagas give us chilling glimpses of this. They tell of rivals carving obscene wooden figures, the infamous nidstang or spite poles, depicting their enemies in degrading sexual positions. These grotesque totems were not crude jokes, they were lethal weapons of slander. To be mocked in such a way was to risk total social annihilation. Entire blood feuds erupted from such insults. Rivers of blood spilled because one man dared to suggest that another had been made ergi. In this world, Bjorn's silent glance at life is not merely dangerous, it is explosive. It is a secret that carries within it the weight of the entire legal and spiritual system of the Norse. One slip, one whisper, one accusation, and his life would not just be ruined, it would be erased. Imagine living under such a constant performance. Every gesture, every word, every glance was scrutinized. Did a man's voice rise too high when he spoke? Did he stand too passively in the shield wall? Did he laugh too softly at a joke? Each tiny detail could spark suspicion, and suspicion could breed whispers, and whispers could erupt into accusations. In this world, masculinity was not simply lived, it was policed, performed, and defended with blood. And so the Viking longhouse was not only a place of feasting and fellowship, it was a crucible of pressure, a stage upon which every man acted his role with ferocity. The fire in the hearth illuminated not just their scars but their insecurities. The laughter and boasts were not simply entertainment, they were shields against the terror of being branded ergi. This is the paradox of Viking masculinity, a culture that celebrated ferocious brotherhood, yet lived in mortal fear of any bond that could be mistaken for softness. A world where men trusted each other with their lives in battle, yet could destroy each other with a single word. A society that claimed to honor strength, but was obsessed with the shadow of weakness. And at the heart of it all lay ergi, the word unspoken, the curse feared, the stain that could strip a man of everything. To be called ergi was worse than death. Death could be faced with a sword in hand, songs sung of your bravery, your name etched into saga. But ergi meant silence. Ergi meant erasure. In this brutal landscape, Bjorn's secret is not simply forbidden, it is fatal. His heart pounds with a dangerous truth. The greatest threat to a Viking warrior is not the Saxon spear or the Frankish sword. It is the whisper of ergi, a word that could unmake him more completely than any blade. In the Viking world, sex was never just about desire. It was about dominance, status, and power. To modern eyes, this may seem strange. Why would the role one played matter more than the act itself? But in the harsh social order of the North, the difference between life and death, between honor and obliteration, often hinged on this subtle but devastating line. It was not the existence of intimacy between men that provoked outrage. It was the position one took within that intimacy. To be the dominant, penetrating partner was not forbidden. In fact, it could even be twisted into proof of one's hyper-masculinity, a way to humiliate an enemy or assert superiority over someone of lower rank. But to be the passive one, to receive, was unthinkable. It was to surrender the essence of manhood. To submit was to become ergi, and ergi was ruin. This paradox created a terrifying social landscape, a world where the same act could elevate one man's reputation and utterly destroy another's. If a warrior forced a rival into submission, society might applaud his cunning, his ruthless display of power. He could stride into the longhouse, chest heaving with triumph, and his brothers in arms would raise their horns in laughter. But the man on the other side of that encounter, he was branded forever. He was no longer a man, no longer fit to stand in the shield wall or claim inheritance or sit at the feast. His name became a curse, his very existence a wound in the collective body of the clan. This is the twisted heart of Viking masculinity. The act was not forbidden, but the role was fatal. And so tension crackled in the longhouse like sparks from the hearth fire. A lingering glance, a touch held a moment too long, a word spoken in too soft a tone. Any of these could ignite suspicion. Men learned to armor not just their bodies, but their gestures, their voices, their very mannerisms. The performance of masculinity was relentless, an endless theater where every man was both actor and audience, constantly watching, constantly judged. For Bjorn, sitting across the fire from life, this paradox was a knife's edge. What he felt in his chest, this dangerous warmth, this flicker of forbidden affection, was not simply a private matter of the heart. It was a gamble in a game rigged against him. If their bond were discovered, if anyone suspected softness, the interpretation would hinge not on their feelings, but on their roles. One might walk away with his reputation intact, the stain of suspicion quickly burned off by another act of violence or dominance. The other would be annihilated, reduced to an argman, an outcast to be hunted like a wolf. The sagas speak often of this razor-thin line. They tell of warriors mocking their enemies with carved wooden poles, the infamous needstang, obscene effigies designed to accuse a rival of submission. The figure itself was not dangerous, it was the meaning behind it. To be depicted in a passive pose was to have your honor shredded before the entire community. Feuds erupted from these accusations, families torn apart, blood spilled over nothing more than the suggestion that one man had been turned into a woman. And yet, within this brutality lay an even darker truth. Sexual violence was sometimes used as a weapon of war. To force a captive into the passive role was the ultimate act of domination. It was not framed as forbidden desire, but as proof of power. In the warped logic of Norse masculinity, one man's crime became another man's glory. This warped morality created an atmosphere of constant fear. Intimacy itself became dangerous, affection suspicious, desire deadly. The very love that bound shield brothers together, the trust that kept men alive in battle, was poisoned by the threat of ergi. A hug held too long, a smile that lingered, even a song sung too tenderly could be twisted into evidence. What might have been moments of humanity, fragile sparks of warmth in a brutal world, became potential death sentences. The paradox also reveals the vulnerability at the core of Viking society. For all their boasts of strength, their world was haunted by fragility. Masculinity, supposedly ironclad, was in fact brittle, easily cracked by accusation. The strongest warrior could be undone not by a sword but by a whisper. The fiercest raider could lose everything to a single word spoken in malice. Honor was a fortress built of glass, glittering but fragile. And so the Vikings lived in a pressure cooker of suspicion and performance. They built their identities upon domination, yet they feared more than anything being seen as dominated. This fear created a society both hyper-masculine and deeply insecure, one that celebrated strength while obsessively hunting for weakness. For Bjorn, this paradox was suffocating. Every time he looked at life, he felt both exhilaration and dread. The fire between them could warm him or burn him alive. He knew that in another world, in another time, perhaps their bond could have been something celebrated, like the sworn brotherhoods of warriors bound by blood oaths and loyalty. But in the here and now, under the shadow of ergi, it was a secret more dangerous than any enemy sword. That is the true paradox of Viking sexuality, a culture that permitted acts of dominance yet punished tenderness with death. A society where men trusted each other in battle but destroyed each other with whispers, where love could be mistaken for weakness and weakness was unforgivable. And so, as the longhouse roared with laughter and the fire cracked in the hearth, Bjorn's silence was not emptiness. It was survival. His secret was a flame hidden beneath iron, burning quietly, dangerously, in a world that demanded every man be a pillar of stone. One glance at Leif could mean companionship or catastrophe. In that paradox lay the cruel truth of the North, that power and love, domination and desire were forever locked in a dance more dangerous than any battle fought with axe and shield. When the Vikings raised their drinking horns and sang of the gods, they weren't just telling stories. They were mapping out the boundaries of their own lives. What was possible, what was forbidden, what was heroic, and what was shameful. And yet, within these sagas, a terrible contradiction lay hidden. For at the very heart of their pantheon stood Odin, the All-Father, the king of the gods, the patron of warriors, kings and poets. And he was tainted with the very stain the Vikings feared most, ergi. Odin was revered as the god of wisdom, war, and death. His one eye glowed with the knowledge he had bought at Mimir's well. His spear Gungnir never missed its mark. He was the chieftain of Valhalla, the one who welcomed slain warriors to an eternal feast. But Odin's power was not built solely on brute force. He was not Thor, smashing giants with his hammer. His true strength came from something far stranger, far more unsettling: Seder. Seder was a form of magic, taught to him by the goddess Freya. It was the magic of weaving fate, of prophecy, of manipulating the threads of destiny. It was a magic of reception, not action. A man entering trance, opening himself to visions, to voices, to spirits. In Viking eyes, this was a profoundly feminine act. It required passivity, surrender, becoming a vessel rather than a weapon. For mortal men, to practice Seder was to invite destruction. To take part in such rituals was to brand oneself with ergi, to be mocked, humiliated, and cast out. And yet Odin, the god of gods, did exactly that. The sagas do not shy away from this contradiction. In the poem Lokasenna, the trickster god Loki hurls insult after insult at the assembled deities, exposing their secrets and shames. And when he turns on Odin, he unleashes the most venomous accusation of all, that the All-Father practiced Seder like a witch, wandering among mortals, striking a drum, abandoning the masculine for the unmanly. In Viking culture, this was not just gossip. It was a declaration of ergi against the king of the gods. What is more shocking is Odin's response. He does not deny it. He does not rage as Thor would, nor slink away in silence. Instead, he parries with his own insult, mocking Loki's infamous escapades, shape-shifting into a mare, seducing a stallion, and giving birth to a foal. Odin acknowledges the shame, but in doing so reveals something far deeper. He was willing to bear that shame for the sake of power. This is the paradox that haunted the Viking imagination. Odin embodied ultimate masculinity, chieftain, warrior, king, but he also crossed into the feminine, embracing the very thing that defined ergi. His authority was built not only on the spear and the battlefield, but on a willingness to do what no mortal man could: sacrifice honor itself. He gave his eye for wisdom, his body for knowledge of the runes, his pride for mastery of Seder. In him shame became strength, but this divine hypocrisy did not comfort men like Bjorn, it terrified them. For if even Odin himself could be accused of ergi, then what chance did any mortal have of surviving such an accusation? The gods were allowed contradictions. They were vast enough to contain them. Mortals were not. For a human warrior, to practice satyr or to show softness was to be destroyed, not exalted. Around Odin, the contradictions only grew sharper. Thor, his son, stood as the perfect opposite, blunt, forceful, uncomplicated masculinity. Thor did not weave fate. He shattered obstacles. His hammer was the ultimate symbol of penetration, crushing giants, smashing enemies, reaffirming over and over the Viking ideal of aggressive, unthinking strength. And yet, even Thor was not untouched by humiliation. When his hammer was stolen, and he was forced to dress as the goddess Freya to win it back, the saga turns it into comedy. But beneath the laughter is discomfort. Thor's fury at being forced into a feminine role speaks volumes. Even for a god, the mere appearance of softness was unbearable. And then there was Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the breaker of rules. Loki slipped in and out of forms, changing sex, birthing children, mocking boundaries. He was the living embodiment of chaos, a figure who exposed the fragility of the Viking system by refusing to play by its rules. He fathered monsters, gave birth to beasts, and reveled in the transgression that others feared. If Odin represented the paradox and Thor the ideal, Loki was the nightmare, the proof of what happened when all boundaries collapsed. It is no accident that Loki's constant violations ultimately helped bring about Ragnarok, the end of the world. For the Vikings, these divine dramas mirrored their own struggles. The gods themselves walked the knife's edge between strength and shame, power and degradation. But the difference was clear. Gods could survive the paradox. Men could not. Odin could bear ergi and remain the All-Father. A mortal who bore the same stain became an outlaw, a creature to be hunted. Imagine Bjorn sitting in the longhouse as the skald sang these tales. He would hear the laughter at Thor's humiliation, the venom in Loki's insult, the strange, unnerving acknowledgement in Odin's reply, and he would feel the chill run through him. The stories did not grant him safety. They warned him of the dangers. They whispered that even the gods danced with shame, but mortals who did so were doomed. This is the great contradiction of Norse mythology. It upheld the most brutal standards of masculinity, yet its most powerful figure broke them. It glorified dominance, yet its king embraced passivity in pursuit of wisdom. It mocked softness, yet its trickster reveled in it. The sagas were not tidy moral lessons. They were reflections of a world constantly at war with itself, a culture that demanded rigidity but was haunted by fluidity. And so the fire in the longhouse crackled, shadows twisting like spirits across the walls. Bjorn listened, his heart caught between fear and wonder. If Odin could sacrifice his honor for power, could a man sacrifice his honor for love? Or would such a question itself be blasphemy, a thought too dangerous to voice even in silence? The sagas did not answer. They only deepened the paradox, and in that silence Bjorn understood the cruel truth. The gods could afford contradictions. Men could not. In the Viking world, law was not some distant parchment tucked away in a chieftain's hall. It was a living, breathing force, sharper than steel, more merciless than winter. To break it was not merely to risk punishment, it was to forfeit one's very humanity. Nowhere was this more brutally clear than in the laws surrounding ergi. The great Icelandic law code, Gragas, laid out the rules with chilling precision. If a man was proven to be arg, tainted by passivity, marked with the stain of ergi, he ceased to exist as a person in the eyes of the community. He was declared an outlaw. And in Viking law, outlawry was not exile. It was annihilation. An outlaw was stripped of name, of rights, of kinship, of his marriage dissolved, his children declared fatherless, his property seized. From that moment he was a varga, a wolf, and like a wolf, he could be hunted down and killed by anyone, anywhere, without consequence. In fact, those who killed him might even be rewarded. Think of what that means. A warrior who once stood shield to shield with his brothers, who had feasted at the same fire, laughed at the same songs, could be transformed overnight into prey. The same men who had trusted him with their lives in battle could now cut him down in the forest and mount his head as proof of their loyalty to the law. That was the terror of ergi. It did not simply dishonor you, it unmade you. Honor in this world was everything. It was more precious than gold, more enduring than land. A man's reputation was his shield, his currency, his legacy. To lose it was worse than death. And so, one of the most feared weapons in Viking society was not the axe or spear but the spoken word. A single insult, a whispered accusation of ergi could unravel a man's entire life. This is why the Vikings treated slander with such gravity. If another man called you arg, if he accused you of being passive, the law itself granted you the right to draw your sword and kill him on the spot. This was not vigilante violence. It was legally sanctioned justice. To allow such an insult to pass unpunished was to admit its truth. A man who failed to defend his honor might as well carve the word ergi into his own forehead. But what if the accusation was true? What if a man was caught in the act, or if the whispers grew too loud to silence? Then the law offered no shield, no defense. To be proven arg was to be condemned. No duel could wash it away, no oath could restore it. The stain was permanent, and the punishment was not a swift execution, but a social death more terrifying than the grave. The sagas are filled with bloodshed born from this ruthless code. Families torn apart, rivalries inflamed, men hounded across mountains and fjords, all because of a single insult. A warrior's life might be consumed entirely by the need to disprove a charge of ergi, chasing his accuser to the ends of the earth, spilling blood until the stain was cleansed. The logic was brutal, but unyielding. Only vengeance could restore honor. And yet the cruelty of this system ran deeper still. For in Viking law, even victims were not spared. A man who had been sexually assaulted did not receive sympathy or compassion. Instead, he carried the same stigma as if he had submitted willingly. The logic was pitiless. To be penetrated was to be passive. To be passive was to be ergi, and to be ergi was to be ruined. Consent did not matter. The shame was the same. Imagine the torment of such victims. Already wounded by violence, they were now forced into an impossible dilemma. They could seek vengeance, spilling blood to prove their honor still intact, or live forever branded as weak, unmanly, tainted. Silence meant shame. Inaction meant obliteration. In this world, even suffering itself could not protect you. Pain was not an excuse. Survival was not a defense. Only revenge could cleanse. This created a society saturated with paranoia. Every man lived under the constant shadow of suspicion. His laughter, his stance, his tone of voice, all could be scrutinized for signs of weakness. Masculinity had to be performed endlessly, aggressively, as if every moment of life were a trial. A man who failed to project strength risked whispers. Whispers risked accusations, and accusations risked the fate of the outlaw. The law, then, was not simply a set of rules. It was a cage. It forced men to fight, to kill, to constantly assert their dominance in order to stay alive. It created a culture where violence was not only expected but demanded, where words could draw blood, where shame was worse than death, where the line between honor and annihilation was as thin as a blade. And it is within this suffocating legal web that Bjorn sits, staring at life across the fire. Every heartbeat, every flicker of desire is a gamble. He knows that one careless glance, one slip of the tongue could be enough to spark a whisper. And from a whisper could come an insult. And from an insult could come a duel, or worse, outlawry. His longing is not just dangerous, it is potentially fatal. For in the Viking world, love was not the opposite of hate. Love was the opposite of honor, and honor was everything. When the long ships cut through the icy waves and smashed against foreign shores, the Vikings did not only bring fire and iron, they also carried with them a worldview forged in smoke-filled halls, in sagas sung to the beat of drums, in laws etched with blood. And every raid, every conquest, hurled that worldview against another, different, strange, sometimes incomprehensible. Few collisions were more profound or more dangerous than the one between Viking masculinity and the faith of Christ. Even the sagas, despite their obsession with masculine honor, sometimes betray glimpses of these realities. They tell of warriors whose grief for fallen brothers is described in language more passionate than any tale of wives. They tell of bonds so fierce that poets struggled to frame them as mere loyalty. Was it love? The sagas never admit it. But between their lines, in the pauses of their verse, another story hums like a hidden chord. For men like Bjorn, these loopholes were not luxuries, they were survival. To live openly was impossible, but to bend the rules, to cloak love in ritual, in poetry, in brotherhood, was to create a space where the impossible could flicker into being. Their lives became performances, masks layered upon masks. In the shield wall, their touch could linger under the guise of necessity. In the feast, their laughter could blend into the chorus of men. In the oath of blood brotherhood, their devotion could be sanctified by the very culture that would have destroyed them. And yet this survival was fragile. It demanded constant vigilance. A word spoken too plainly, a glance held too long, a poem written without enough ambiguity. Any of these could crack the disguise. The law was merciless, the church unrelenting. But within these narrow margins, men carved out hidden worlds, fleeting sanctuaries in a storm. Think of it, a love story written not in proclamations but in codes, not in parades but in silence. A relationship lived on a knife's edge, where every moment of tenderness had to be smuggled beneath the weight of ritual, metaphor, and loyalty. It was not freedom, not even close, but it was survival. And survival in the Viking world was everything. For Bjorn, the path was clear. If he and life were to endure, it would not be as lovers. It would be as brothers, sworn by blood, celebrated by saga, hidden in plain sight. Their passion would wear the mask of loyalty, their tenderness cloaked in poetry, their love disguised as the fiercest form of honor. In this way, they could build a life together in shadows, a life the law could not erase, a life the gods themselves might overlook. This is the tragedy and the triumph of forbidden love in the Viking Age. It could not exist openly. It could not demand recognition, but it could endure secretly, quietly, like a flame that refuses to die, flickering in the cracks of a brutal world. History often speaks with the voice of victors, of lawmakers, of priests. It sings of kings and battles, of axes and crowns. But beneath that thunderous chorus, there are always quieter notes, whispers that survive in the margins of sagas, in the silences between laws, in the rituals that concealed as much as they revealed. The story of same-sex love in the Viking world belongs to those whispers. It was never the tale of open freedom, of banners raised or parades of pride. It was, instead, a story of survival, of men and women carving out hidden spaces in a society that denied their existence. To love someone of the same sex in Viking Scandinavia was not to claim an identity. It was to carry a secret heavier than any shield. It meant living with the knowledge that discovery was annihilation, that one careless glance could summon ruin, that desire itself was a crime both against the laws of men and later against the judgment of God. And yet, love endured. It endured in the firelit glance exchanged across a longhouse, in the oath of blood brothers sworn beneath the turf where devotion could be sanctified under another name, in the coded verses of skalds, where kennings bent meaning like iron into new forms, and tenderness could hide within the metaphors of ravens and wolves. It endured in the silence of sleeping camps, where warriors pressed close for warmth and found for a moment something more. This endurance did not look like triumph, it looked like performance. Viking masculinity was a mask worn day and night, laughter forced louder than needed, fists clenched tighter, voices pitched deeper, all to fend off suspicion. Behind that mask, however, lived quiet rebellions, a touch disguised as camaraderie, a promise wrapped in the language of loyalty, a relationship that existed not because it was allowed, but because it refused to be extinguished. The laws tried to erase them, the sagas mocked them with venomous insults, the church damned them with visions of hellfire. And still, in the cracks of this suffocating edifice, love found a way to survive. That is perhaps the most astonishing part of the story. Not that Viking society was brutal, that much is clear, but that even in such brutality, human connection persisted. When we look back, it is tempting to think only of the violence, the fear, the erasure, to see men like Bjorn and Leif as shadows forever silenced by their world. But history is never so absolute. The very intensity of the prohibitions, the venom of the word ergi, the elaborate laws of Gragas, the sermons that thundered against sodomy, prove something remarkable. They prove that what was forbidden was also present. That love between men was not a rare aberration, but a recurring reality. A reality so common, so persistent, that entire systems of law and faith had to be built to crush it. In this sense, Viking same-sex love is not only a story of repression, but also of resistance. Not resistance in the open, with weapons or words, but resistance in the most human of forms. Endurance. Every hidden glance, every coded phrase, every oath of blood that carried a deeper meaning, these were acts of defiance. They were refusals to let society dictate the boundaries of affection. They were proof that even under the weight of law and faith, the heart found ways to speak. Perhaps that is why the sagas, for all their brutality, sometimes betray moments of tenderness. A warrior weeping for his fallen brother. A verse that lingers too long on the beauty of another man's courage. These fragments may not proclaim love openly, but they echo with something deeper than camaraderie. They suggest that behind the performance of masculinity, real emotions pulsed, messy, dangerous, uncontainable. The story of Bjorn and Leif, whether real or imagined, whether drawn from sagas or from silence, is not unique. It represents countless unrecorded lives, countless hidden loves that never made it into history books. Because history, written by the powerful, prefers neat categories, warrior or outlaw, masculine or feminine, honorable or disgraced. But real life is never neat. Real life slips through the cracks, and it is in those cracks that we find the truth. The truth that even in the most repressive societies, love refuses to die. The truth that masculinity, no matter how rigidly enforced, cannot smother every spark of tenderness. The truth that human beings, even when threatened with erasure, will cling to one another in the shadows. So when we picture the Viking world, let us not see only the axes and the longships, the raids and the laws. Let us also see the quiet fire in the longhouse, the blood oath beneath the turf, the coded verse whispered in the hall. Let us see the men and women who lived dangerously, who loved in silence, who survived not by conquering but by enduring. Their story is not one of pride parades or proclamations. It is a story written in glances, in silences, in oaths and poems, a story of survival against impossible odds. And in that survival lies its own kind of victory, a victory not of conquest, but of persistence. For history may have tried to bury them, but in the end, the very effort to erase them proves that they were always there. And that is perhaps the most powerful conclusion of all, that love, even when silenced, leaves its trace.